I crossed $300,000 in my brokerage account on a Tuesday in October 2016. I was 28 years old. I'd been investing consistently for 6 years. I'd sold the BMW 2 years earlier, driven the Camry in its place, and watched the number on my Vanguard app climb slowly from 40,000 to 80,000 to 150,000 to this morning. I refreshed it. The total said $301,247. I refreshed it again, still there. And then I felt nothing. No fireworks, no relief, just a slightly different number than yesterday and a workday ahead of me. I texted David, my neighbor with the dented Honda Accord and the 815 credit score, who had been giving me unsolicited financial advice since I moved in. I sent him the screenshot. He texted back 4 words. Come over Saturday morning. That Saturday morning is the reason my financial life over the next decade looked the way it did. David spent about an hour walking me through what he called the 300K rules. They aren't rules in the formal sense. They're a set of 5 mechanical behaviors that apply specifically to the wealth range between roughly $250,000 and $750,000. Because that's the range where the math of your portfolio starts behaving differently than it did below $250,000, and the choices you make in this range have a permanent effect on whether you ever reach $1 million. Almost nobody talks about this range specifically. The personal finance world is full of advice for people starting from zero and for people who already have $1 million. The middle section, where the math is actively changing while you're not paying attention, is the part where most people stall. Some people stay at 300,000 for a decade. Some people make a few wrong moves and slide back to 150,000. A small percentage figure out the rules and watch their account triple in the next 10 years on autopilot. The difference isn't intelligence or income. It's whether you know which behaviors stop working at this level and which new ones start. I'm Tom. I'm going to walk you through David's 5 rules, what each one fixes, and the version of me that needed each one explained over his garage workbench that Saturday morning while he changed the oil on the Accord. This channel is real personal finance for normal people. If that's what you want, hit subscribe. Rule 1. Location beats allocation. David asked me first what was in my 300,000. I told him, about 90% broad market index funds, 10% international, all sitting roughly evenly split across my 401k, my Roth IRA, and my taxable brokerage. He pulled a folded receipt out of his back pocket and started drawing on the blank side. 3 boxes went down across the paper. In the first, he wrote 401k, then Roth in the second, and taxable in the third. Then he asked me which one I was going to live off first when I eventually retired. I said the taxable account, since I'd be too young to access the others. He drew an arrow over the taxable box and wrote growth. Then he drew a second arrow over the 401k and wrote boring. Then he wrote over the Roth, highest expected return. The point he was making is what financial planners call asset location. Below $250,000 in total assets, asset location barely matters because the dollar amounts in each wrapper are so small that the tax friction is rounding error. Once you cross 300,000, the dollar amounts get big enough that where you hold each asset class changes your annual return by somewhere between 1/4 and 3/4%. Across a 30-year horizon on a portfolio that starts where mine did, that's potentially $400,000 to $600,000 of additional ending wealth. The basic rule is the assets that produce the least tax friction go in the most taxable account, and the assets that produce the most tax friction go in the most protected account. Broad market index funds, which throw off small dividends and only get taxed when you sell, belong in your taxable brokerage. Bonds, which throw off ordinary interest taxed at your full marginal rate, belong in your 401k, where the interest grows tax-deferred. REITs with their non-qualified dividends belong in tax-advantaged accounts as well. Your highest expected return assets belong in your Roth because everything that grows in there is permanently tax-free. When David walked me through my own holdings, I'd done it almost backwards. I had bonds in my taxable brokerage where their interest was getting taxed at my full marginal rate every year, which at the time was 25%. I had REITs in my Roth, which was wasting Roth space on a high-yield asset I should have parked somewhere tax-deferred. Across a working lifetime, that mistake alone, if I'd left it untouched, would have cost me an estimated $150,000 by retirement. The fix was a single rebalance, done over 2 evenings, that swapped what was in which account without changing my overall allocation at all. Same stocks and bonds, same total dollars, just shuffled into the right wrappers. The IRS noticed nothing. My portfolio quietly started outperforming itself by a few tenths of a percent every year. This is the part of $300,000 that almost nobody coaches you on. The mental model changes from what do I own to what is each dollar doing in which wrapper. Rule 2, the 8% threshold. David asked me next what debt I had. I had a car loan at 3.4% and a mortgage at 4.6%. He asked if I was planning to pay either off early. I said yes. He asked why. I said it would feel good. He wrote on the paper 8% and underlined it. Below it, he wrote, if a debt costs less than this, do not touch your investments to pay it off. The math is simple and it surprises people. Long-term broad market returns average about 10% nominal, 7% real. The threshold for, is this debt worth attacking with investment dollars, is whatever rate you expect your portfolio to earn after taxes and inflation. The honest number for most people is somewhere between 6 and 8%. To create a margin of safety, David's rule is 8%. Below that, you keep paying minimums on the debt and let your portfolio keep compounding. Above that, you attack the debt aggressively from any source you can find. This rule sounds like financial blasphemy to people who've grown up on debt aversion content. The instinct to pay off your mortgage early is strong. It feels safer. It feels mature. The math says it's neither of those things at low rates. A 4.6% mortgage held while $300,000 sits in an index fund, earning roughly 10% nominal pre-tax, or maybe 8% after taxes on the gains, leaves a positive spread of around 3 percentage points on every dollar of mortgage balance you don't pay off. Across a 30-year mortgage on a $300,000 loan, that's potentially $200,000 of compounded wealth you're not giving up. Above 8%, the math flips. A credit card at 22% is a guaranteed negative return that no portfolio can beat. The same logic applies to a personal loan at 14% or a car loan at 11%. Attack those with everything you've got, including pulling some money from taxable brokerage if you have to. The hard part of this rule is emotional, not mathematical. Most people in their late 20s and early 30s have been told their whole lives that debt is bad. The truth at $300,000 is that some debt is bad, and some debt is the cheapest leverage you'll ever access. The 8% line is the cleanest filter for which is which. I sent a small extra payment on my mortgage that month, the last extra payment I would send for the next 9 years. The dollars went into the brokerage instead. By 2026, that habit alone has added roughly $90,000 to my net worth that wouldn't have existed if I'd kept paying my mortgage down faster. Rule 3, the release valve. The third rule is the one I argued with David about for 40 minutes. He told me that at $300,000, I needed to commit 5 to 10% of any future raise or bonus to genuine lifestyle improvement, not investing it, not saving it, spending it, on something that made my actual life better, that I wouldn't feel guilty about, that wasn't an attempt to impress anyone. I pushed back hard. The whole reason I had $300,000 at 28 was that I'd ignored lifestyle inflation for 6 years. I drove a Camry. The apartment was small. Most meals happened at home. Bedtime was early. Why would the right move be to start spending more right when the compounding was finally getting interesting? David's answer was that the discipline that gets someone to $300,000 has a finite shelf life. Almost everyone who tries to maintain pure austerity from 25 to 65 quits somewhere in their 40s, and the quit isn't graceful. It usually shows up as a divorce, a midlife crisis purchase, a job change driven by burnout rather than opportunity, or a slow accumulation of resentment toward the spreadsheet that's been running their life. Each of those failure modes is more expensive than the lifestyle release valve would have been. Most personal finance content tells you to stay frugal forever. That's bad advice past a certain wealth level, because pure frugality forever is what nobody actually does. The good version of this rule is intentional release. You pick one or two specific upgrades that genuinely matter to you, and you fund them out of new income, not from the portfolio. For me at 28, it was the right hiking gear and an annual trip somewhere I'd wanted to go for years. For David at 28, it was a season ticket to a baseball team he loved, and a kitchen knife that cost more than seemed reasonable. The total dollars in either case were small. The psychological return was outsized. What this rule prevents is the catastrophic version of lifestyle creep, which doesn't come from 1,000 small upgrades. It comes from one big resentment-driven decision after years of denying yourself everything. A planned $5,000 of annual lifestyle release in your 30s prevents a $50,000 mistake in your 40s. The math on that trade-off is among the most reliable returns available at this wealth level, and it's not on any spreadsheet. Rule 4, the annual harvest. David asked me whether I'd ever done tax loss harvesting. I said I knew the term, but had never actually done it. He told me that at $300,000, I should plan to do it at least once a year, ideally during any market drop of 10% or more. Tax loss harvesting is the practice of selling investments that have lost value, locking in the loss for tax purposes, and immediately buying a substantially similar but not identical investment to maintain your market exposure. The IRS lets you use up to $3,000 of net realized losses per year to offset ordinary income and unlimited losses to offset capital gains. Anything beyond $3,000 carries forward indefinitely into future tax years. Below $200,000 of portfolio, this exercise rarely produces enough loss to matter. At $300,000, with a normal market correction of 15 to 25% on the taxable portion of your portfolio, you can easily generate $10,000 to $20,000 of harvested losses in a single bad year. That harvest does two things for you at once. It offsets $3,000 of ordinary income immediately, saving you around $700 to $900 in federal tax, depending on your bracket. And it builds up a carry forward of capital losses that can offset future gains for the rest of your investment life. Most $300,000 portfolios that did nothing in 2022, when the S&P 500 dropped 25% peak to trough, missed somewhere between $5,000 and $15,000 of permanent tax savings that they could have captured by spending an afternoon executing a few trades. That's not lost portfolio value. That's lost tax savings that don't come back. The execution is simpler than it sounds. Sell the index fund that's down 18%, the same hour, buy a similar but not identical index fund tracking nearly the same market. Wait 31 days, then if you want, swap back. The IRS calls this avoiding the wash sale rule. The result is that your market exposure barely changed. Your portfolio behaved as if you'd done nothing during the dip, and you walked away with a meaningful pile of harvested losses sitting in your tax return forever. I started doing this every year after that Saturday. The cumulative federal tax savings over the last decade is conservatively $14,000, with another $8,000 of carry forward losses still sitting on my tax return, waiting to offset future gains. Rule 5. Insure the real asset. The last rule was the one that surprised me most. David asked what I thought my biggest financial asset was. I said the $300,000 in my brokerage. He shook his head. He said my biggest financial asset was the next 30 years of my career. which, if I averaged $120,000 a year of income over that span, was a $3.6 million asset that wasn't on any spreadsheet anywhere. The point of the rule is that at $300,000 of investments, your career is still vastly bigger than your portfolio in net present value terms. Your portfolio gets all the attention because you can see it on a screen. Your career, which has multiples more value, is sitting completely unhedged in the background. Most people at this wealth level have meticulous spreadsheets tracking their net worth and zero protection on the income stream that funds it. The fix is two specific moves. Long-term disability insurance is the first. Industry data suggests about 1 in 3 working adults will experience a disability event during their career that prevents them from earning for at least 90 days. Average Social Security disability insurance benefits in 2026 are around $1,630 a month, well below what most professionals need to maintain their family's life. A private long-term disability policy through your employer or an independent broker typically costs 1 to 3% of your salary annually, around $1,200 to $3,600 a year for someone earning $120,000, and protects 50 to 70% of your pre-tax income if you can't work. It's the cheapest insurance per dollar of value protected that exists in the consumer market, and almost nobody at $300,000 has it. The second move is harder to systematize, but more important over time. Pick a calendar reminder once a year to check the job market for your role, regardless of whether you're planning to leave. Stay current on what your skills pay externally. Build a small second income stream of any kind, even one that earns only a few $100s a month, because that stream changes how you negotiate at your primary job and gives you optionality you don't have if your single employer is your single source of income. The dollar amount the side stream earns is mostly irrelevant at $300,000 of investable wealth. What it produces is leverage in conversations with your employer, which over a working career is worth tens of thousands of dollars of higher compensation. The combination of the two moves protects the $3.6 million career asset that you can't see on a screen. Once both are in place, the $300,000 portfolio gets to compound in peace without you ever having to dip into it from a crisis that should have been insured against. I followed all 5 of David's rules within about 3 months of that Saturday. The asset location rebalance got done over 2 evenings. I stopped sending extra payments on my mortgage and routed them to my brokerage. The hiking gear and the annual trip got bought that summer. My first tax loss harvest happened during a small correction in early 2018. By the end of that fall, I'd signed up for a long-term disability policy through my employer that cost me $34 a month for $5,500 of monthly coverage. The portfolio over the next decade did exactly what David said it would. It tripled. I crossed $1 million on a Tuesday in late 2021. None of that increase was the rules generating returns on their own. The S&P had a strong run over those years, averaging closer to 10% real, well above its long-term average of around 7%. But the rule advantages didn't depend on that strong run. They would have added the same percentage advantage to my outcome at average market returns. Asset location alone added roughly 0.4% per year on top of whatever the market did. Keeping the 8% threshold meant my dollars stayed compounding instead of paying down cheap debt. My release valve kept me from making the burnout mistake my friends made. Annual harvesting dropped my lifetime tax bill by about $22,000 of measurable savings. The disability insurance never paid out, which is the result you want from insurance. None of those individually feels like a transformation. Together, across 10 years of compounding, they're the difference between staying at $300,000 and reaching $1 million on autopilot. The reason people stall at $300,000 isn't that the math gets harder. It's that the math gets different, and almost nobody updates their playbook. The behaviors that work below $250,000, which mostly come down to discipline, savings rate, and avoiding catastrophic mistakes, are necessary but not sufficient at the next level. You need a new set of moves that take advantage of the new dollar amounts you're working with. If you're somewhere between $250,000 and $500,000 in invested assets right now, pick one of the 5 rules this week and apply it. Don't try to do all 5 at once. The location swap takes 1 weekend. Applying the 8% threshold takes 1 decision. A release valve takes 1 honest conversation with yourself. Setting up the annual harvest takes 1 calendar reminder. Buying the career insurance takes 1 phone call. Each one independently moves your trajectory. Together, across a decade, they're what separates the people who reach $1 million from the people who spend 10 years stuck. David's still my neighbor. He still drives that dented Accord. The 815 credit score is still intact. He never told me directly what his portfolio crossed during the years I was crossing 300,000 to 1 million, but I'm pretty sure he was a multiple of where I am. And I'm pretty sure the rules he gave me were the same rules he'd given himself a decade earlier. Tell me in the comments which rule you find hardest to commit to. I'll read every one. I'll see you in the next video.